to start? I don't feel so good.
You're all right.
I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's happening. I don't want to.
Okay.
Welcome, kind women, mood-swinging fourth wall breakers, and nondescript teen moms, to episode 517 of an Unearthly podcast, streaming live on the 22nd of June, 2024, and featuring Empire of Death, written by Russell T Davies, and starring Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor, Millie Gibson as Ruby Sunday, and Bonnie Langford as Mel Bush. I am Bill Sylvia, the one in black, and experiencing central air today reminded me of how poor my sleep has been for the past week. With me are acting technical director Alex Fireheart
Hello.
and our additional color commentary, Aaron Romeo Moon Burke.
Hello.
So, I was talking with Aaron today and realized that the Wisconsin is no longer part of the heat dome, and I am very jealous and envious of that. However, I realized getting outdoors a bit today that thanks to the breeze where I live, it's actually probably nicer for me to go outside during this heat wave than to stay in my allegedly air-conditioned apartment that still doesn't have very great airflow.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not out and about during the hottest parts of the day, but it was definitely parts of the day that would have been well above 80 degrees, and the breeze kept it from being too bad. And then as soon as I got home, I was like, I want to go back outside. How are you both doing?
I just got done having dinner at Longhorn Steakhouse. They have a really good margarita there with dragon fruit, purple dragon fruit. So that was very delicious. And overall, it was a very nice meal. So, and fairly cheap.
I always found dragon fruit to have a more tantalizing name than flavor. Like I would be buying vitamin water, and I'd be like, oh, dragon fruit. Let me get that, and I'd be like, it's all right, but it's nothing like special like the name would imply.
Yeah. Other than that, nothing much else. Just kind of more tornado warnings, more rain. We've been having some flooding issues, so.
Yep. Rain means that a cold front is come. I would highly welcome some rain. Last I looked at the forecast, we have a week before any cold front or rain arrives. Anything interesting on your end, Alex?
Well, thankfully it's looking like so long as I'm very stingy with money between now and Thursday, I should be right for my trip this coming week.
Okay. So that does, by the way, sorry to cut you off. That does mean that two of our 4 podcast members will be going on trips next week, with of course a third member also being up in the air as to whether he's here. So we can pretty much assume that we're skipping next week.
Which I guess at least
I'm
that's
sorry, you're going ahead.
at least that's now after we've finished this
Yes,
current season.
I'm very glad that it's after the end of the
Yeah.
season. That timing was very good. I'm glad you all arranged your lives around Doctor Who.
Yeah, like I was kind of stressing over it, and then when my pay came through, I was like, oh, okay. If I'm just really stingy with money, then like I can probably make this work and only need to borrow like a bit from my parents rather than the amount that I was probably gonna have to. I mean, part of it was also just originally my plan was to like spoil myself a bit by staying in a slightly more expensive hotel suite kind of thing. But then I was like, oh, that could be how I save money, just no longer spoil myself and go for a standard hotel room.
I'm making things work this summer by only paying half of my bills. I'm hoping things work out. All right. On tonight's show, we have birthdays and news. We have a middling amount of both. We do have one item, unless it's changed. Yeah, one item under Geek Talk. Then we have our episode summary, possibly an additional item if we manage to get ahead of time. And then our review, final thoughts, and ratings, and no more predictions since the season is over. So on to Alex with the birthdays.
Yep. So first up, we have on the 16th of June, Simon Williams, who played Group Captain Gilmore in Remembrance of the Daleks, and the Big Finish Countermeasures series and other one-off roles, turned 78. Next up, we have also on the 16th, we have Carol Ann Ford, played Susan Campbell, Nay Foreman, from 63 to 64, again in 83, and also Big Finish, and that one thing that we don't talk about, turned 84. Also on the 16th, we have Michael Kilgariff, who played the Cyber Controller in The Tomb of the Cybermen and Attack of the Cybermen, as well as playing the titular robot in Robot.
And an Ogron.
87. On the 17th of June, we have first up Jodie Whittaker, the 13th Doctor from 2018 to 2022, as well as Arthur Darvill, who played Roy Williams from 2010 to 2012. Was also in Broadchurch with Jodie Whittaker. They both discovered the answer to their life, the universe, and everything because they both turned 42.
Good year.
And on the 19th, we have Millie Gibson, Ruby Sunday from last year to now, and who knows when until, because we know we've at least got her for at least some of season
yeah,
2.
She's officially she's officially on a pause to return later in the season.
Yeah.
So we don't know what that means yet.
She turned 20, which that still baffles me that we've got it's not that we haven't had companions that young fairly recently, but still. And finally, on the 22nd of June, we have Ian Levine, He was in numerous roles, including a preserver of lost episodes and ostensible Doctor Who continuity consultant in the 80s. Turned 71. So happy birthday to Simon, Carol, Michael, Jody, Arthur, Millie, and Ian.
All right, moving on from there to episode news. I've found a new source for ratings information that should have that at least goes into a little bit more detail than what we had before. So the viewing figures for the 7 days for Rogue and the overnights for Legend of Ruby Sunday are in. Let's see. So first off, Rogue was viewed by 3.52 million in its first week, which is up 1.41 million from the overnight, and up 0.14 million on the previous episode Dot and Bubble, which had been a series low. I believe Dot and Bubble had the most to compete with for that week as well on British TV. And Doctor Who mentions that the +7s for the season have ranged from 3.38 million for Dot and Bubble to 4.06 million for 73 yards. So that's a fairly consistent range. Which they point out, it's summer and there's live sporting events. So you expect lower ratings than normal, which is something that culture warriors on social media like to ignore when they say that RTD has killed Doctor Who.
Yeah. And again, it's also on streaming directly as well before it airs on TV, so TV
the streaming
ratings
is
are
part
always
of
going to
it.
be
Rogue's initial spot on the weekly chart is at number 14, which is up 10 places from Dot and Bubble, which we discussed why Dot and Bubble was so low last week. There was an entire week of Britain's Got Talent as well. The average +7 placement for the week is number 15, and the median is 13. Okay, this is next time I'll summarize this because they go into a lot of detail here. I'm used to no detail. They go into great detail here. Meanwhile, the overnights for Legend of Ruby Sunday is 2.02 million, plus 297,000 who watched it before the BBC One transmission, for a total of 2.32 million. Which is a change of 0 from Rogue's overnight. And okay, so just like me, we're not able to find where that placed for the night in terms of most watched things for the overnights. So I guess that information is just less available now. All right. Next, we have some information on a deleted scene from Legend of Ruby Sunday. So we talked a bit about the opening and how it was a little out of place. It seemed weird that it started with immediately going to Unit for help. So there was originally going to be a montage sequence at the start of the episode, with the Doctor and Ruby encountering different versions of Susan Twist. Let's see, one of them would have been a nanny in Pennsylvania in 1946, who would have been pushing a pram, so a stroller for Americans, through a park past Albert Einstein and Paul Robeson, at which the Doctor would have ended up paying more attention to Twist than to the other two. There would have been her as a blue-skinned waitress in an alien diner, as a human astronaut on the surface of an alien world, which was apparently that scene was intended to include the Zarbi. Based on all of this, I'm wondering if this was cut from the script for maybe budgetary purposes,
that
or maybe pacing.
Yeah, I could see it being a bit of both.
I
Yeah.
still think an abbreviated version of this would have helped the opening, if not the pacing in general.
Like even if they just skipped
Um,
the web planet callback, because
mhm.
making an alien planet would be a hell of a lot more expensive than just
Right.
people walking around in a park at an
Although,
alien
granted,
diner.
when the web planet came out, like British TV was like, we're going to make this look like low budget theater. And now it's like, we're going to make it look like, a movie.
Yeah.
So it would have been a very, but again, that was also why it would have been expensive.
Especially because
So, yeah.
they probably would have done CGI or something for the Zabi.
Right. But yeah, I would have liked at least a little bit of that. Even if you didn't do the web planet one, even if it was just a couple of them, even if they were all on Earth, just something to point in the idea of like, okay, there's a reason why they're going to unit and not just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Moving on from there to cast and crew news, there was a Q&A with Russell T Davies at a BAFTA event. This was actually reported by Radio Times last week, but I guess I didn't check Radio Times last week because usually we don't. They usually have a lot of fluff articles and not many articles with new information. Although they have had some good things lately. So let me see. So specifically, this one is addressing ratings and viewing numbers. So RTD said, in coming back, I wanted to make the show simpler and wanted to make it younger. Those two things are often not discussed. You read reactions to it and people are missing that. It's simpler and younger, and it is working. The under 16s and the 16 to 34 audience as well is massive. It's not doing that well in the ratings, but it is doing phenomenally well with the younger audience that we want. So that's a good point in that the numbers completely ignore demographic, and you see things like well, there's the infamous case of, for example, Young Justice, which was highly viewed, but not by the demographics that the executives thought would buy the toys, and therefore canceled it as if it were poorly viewed. Not saying that was the right choice, but this is a very good example of the numbers that we're looking at are not necessarily the numbers that the BBC is looking at.
Right. Which again is another one of those things of clearly ratings have never meant a hell of a lot to Doctor Who. Like they would have to be astronomically low for it to be enough for them to be like, okay, yeah, we're pulling the show off the air.
That said, it's very interesting because one of the many pieces of criticism for the two-part finale is that it seems to be entirely directed at, people who are old enough and have been Doctor Who fans long enough to recognize a one-off Fourth Doctor villain and know who Susan is.
Yeah, I definitely...
Now, whether you think... considering that Pyramids of Mars is probably the most re-aired episode of the show, of the classic series, there's some debate as to whether that criticism holds any water. But it's an interesting juxtaposition there.
Yeah, I mean, it says something that the official YouTube channel for Doctor Who had to put out like a bunch of videos explaining who the hell Sutekh is.
Speaking of which, I didn't include it as an article because we literally can't. None of us can view it legally anyway. But they did do a Tales of the TARDIS for Pyramids of Mars, and it included remastering the episode. But we can't see that, so I'm not really spending time on that.
Yeah, the most that we got that was like available for me to watch that seemed to be labeled as Tales of the TARDIS was like basically just a highlight reel of the story.
All right, the next part of this BAFTA Q&A. So the headline here, Russell T Davies says next project will be about how world is becoming unsafe for LGBTQ plus people. So this is talking about his next project after Doctor Who. Let's see. So Davies said, it's not so much that there's unexplored topics, but the topics I do write about keep changing, like being a gay man or being a queer person in society is changing now. 10 years ago, or even when we did Queer as Folk 25 years ago, we were on the up. It was like good times are here. Now they're absolutely not. That wave coming from America where they're trying to have legislation banning drag queens, that's absolutely going to come here, meaning to the UK. We might get a Labour government in the next couple of years, but that just means we'll have a very right-wing government after that. They're all waiting. They've started the conversation in this country about banning abortion. It started. It started already amongst that right wing. So I think our rights are paper thin. The world is becoming unsafe. So I'll always keep writing about that, and I will always keep writing about male gayness if people will have me. There's a little bit more, but it doesn't add much to it. So if you're familiar with RTD and his work, I don't think there's any surprises there. You know, if the right wing government comes into power, you know, he may have difficulty selling that to the BBC, but I don't necessarily know that BBC is who he wants to work with next either.
Right.
But yeah, I think everything he said sounds perfectly on point to me. People who have a problem with that clearly weren't paying attention to him in the first place when he started working on Doctor Who 19 years ago. Because, like I said, it's the same guy, just reacting in the same way to new times.
Yeah. It's like they're shocked when a progressive TV show winds up being progressive. Like, exactly. I don't remember that. Like, what, really? You don't? This is like the whole point.
Because Shudigatwa doesn't look as much like conservative masculine values as Christopher Eccleston did. All right. Before that becomes a long political conversation that I'm sure all of us have a lot of opinions on, our last bit of news is the Big Finish new releases. On the 18th of June, Big Finish released The Eighth Doctor and Lucy Miller Series 2, which features 8 stories by 8 different writers, starring Paul McGann and Sheridan Smith. And then on the 20th of June, they released Dark Gallifrey Morbius Part 3, written by Tim Foley, starring Samuel West and Tom Baker. So Tom Baker and Morbius. I'd be interested to see what they do that's different than, you know, the serial that they met. The two of them met each other.
I'm seeing a flying ship.
Yeah. Or maybe they go to Earth. And that is the end of our news, which brings us on to Geek Talk. And since there's only one item for Geek Talk, we should actually be comfortably ahead of schedule after that. So this week, I finished reading the novel Final Fantasy VII, The Kids Are All Right, a Turks side story. Kind of a long and messy title, but not a long and messy title for a Japanese novel, which is what it originally was. Written by Kazushige Nojima in 2011 and translated by Melissa Tanaka in 2019. So this is another... It's mostly a prequel to Advent Children. The ending is kind of an epilogue almost. It's also a direct sequel to the Shinra story of On the Way to a Smile. So you continue with you continue the story of what's going on with the Turks and Rufus, but it's mainly focused on two new characters at the time, one of which Final Fantasy VII Remake fans should be very familiar with by now, which are Evan Townsend and Kyrie Kanan. So Kyrie, of course, then was taken from this book and put into Remake and Rebirth, and I think has become universally accepted as the most annoying character in Rebirth, except for Chadley. But the whole anyway. I don't want to get into that. But the whole point of the kids are all right is basically at this point, Kyrie. Well, it's weird. I'm now thinking of it almost as a sequel to Remake, right? It's kind of backward. These characters are now in their early adulthood, so they're outgrowing that annoying teen phase. They're figuring things out with Shinra, and with again, this being a prequel to Advent Children. There's a lot of there's the main plot is basically prequel to Advent Children. So what you really see here is first I'm kind of all over the place with this because I didn't write down thoughts. But basically, Evan and Kyrie need to get to Nibelheim to find someone for the detective agency that they run. And it also turns out that Evan's mother, who left when he was a teenager, was, if you're familiar with the Final Fantasy VII story, was one of the people who repopulated Nibelheim after it was rebuilt. So they're kind of on this quest to find basically two missing people, Evan's mother and this other person who's a little less important, and following along with that. But in the meantime, they keep bumping into the Turks, and then they also run into Kadaj, who at this point is kind of just becoming, and is eventually going to become the main villain of the leader of the villains for the first part of the Advent Children movie. So you have these normal people who don't know how to use magic, don't know how to fight, any more than the average person does. So people who are not video game main characters, basically trying to survive these encounters with basically a shape-shifting psychic alien. And it's was a pretty good read. So the main point of it is the character moments, the getting in these people's heads, the drama, the emotions that they're going through. And I would almost say, like, On the Way to a Smile was just kind of it was all right. It just kind of gave you some things to about before the movie Advent Children starts. The Kids Are All Right is really it's a full story, and it almost justifies buying both just to be able to follow what's going on with the Turks, and then later with Evan and Kyrie all the way through. So if you're a Final Fantasy VII fan, I would highly recommend this book in particular. I don't know if you'll be able to. You probably either need to read On the Way to a Smile or watch Advent Children to kind of follow up with all the plot threads. But I would say it's well worth doing that. And honestly, having read these two makes me want to rewatch Advent Children for the first time in almost 20 years. But I just did not have time to do that this week. And that is the end of that. And we move on to the episode summary.
Okay. All right. I actually have I've actually skimmed over the Wikipedia article to kind of help refresh my memory. So if any chunks sound similar to that, is coming from the 311B 8th episode, Empire of Death, section of the season 14 page for Doctor Who. Hopefully I will be able to not make it sound too much like the wiki article and that. So all right,
Yep.
let me know when.
Yep. Whenever you're ready.
All
Well,
right.
I guess I'll give you a countdown so it's not so I can figure out where to start. Yeah, 3, 2, 1, go.
All right. So Sutekh is confronting Unit Kate Stewart and Unit having, explained that he has been revived by just kind of hitching a ride with the TARDIS throughout space and time wherever the doctor lands. He's kind of been there and apparently has been planting the image of a Susan Triad all over the place. The doctor and Mel are confronting Susan Triad. She releases a dust storm that begins to turn everybody around her into dust, thus killing everyone. Mel and the doctor escape the dust storm and make it back to unit um, to Ruby, who is still in the time window. Um, Unfortunately, it's too late for Kate Stewart and the rest of the unit team as they are taken over by the dust storm created by the Harbinger, who is also kind of helping Sutekh control the Doctor's TARDIS, which Sutekh has thoroughly corrupted. So they escape. Dr. Mel and Ruby escape the unit building through the time window, the TARDIS memory generated by the time window. It's literally just held together by like intelligent, basically intelligent cord and stuff like that. So, uh, they then watch as the Earth is swallowed by the dust storm, and the Doctor reveals that this is happening across all kinds of different planets. They go and find a woman on a desolated planet, one of the last survivors. Before she dies, she hands over a metal spoon to the Doctor, which he uses to drive the TARDIS um, into the future, 2046, into the future, where they learned that where they have previously learned that Gwilla Madjack has created a DNA database which they could use to find Ruby's mother with. They find Ruby's mother, but just then Mel is taken over by the Sutekh, turns evil, and uh, brings them back to Sutekh himself. Sutekh confronts Ruby. Ruby confronts Sutekh with the name of her mother, and subsequently distracts Sutekh long enough that the Doctor can revive the TARDIS, reject the Harbinger, and using the TARDIS, they trap Sutekh along with the TARDIS, drag him along space and time reverse, basically killing death. They use his own death ability to kill him, the death around him, which creates life in return. Returns everybody back to normal, except for like a small spattering of dust everywhere. Um, as a result, Sutekh is cut free from the TARDIS, which he dissolves into the vortex that the TARDIS travels through. Um, Later on, after dust has settled, Ruby talks to the Doctor about how they found her mother. She goes and talks to her mother and reunites with her. She also tells the Doctor that they may have found her father and that she plans on meeting him. The Doctor bids farewell to Ruby. It's all kind of a sad ending, and then at the very end, Mrs. Flood appears atop the roof of Ruby's mother's building and talks to the audience about how awful an end the Doctor will face coming up. The end.
Okay, you did that in 4 minutes, 13 seconds.
Yay!
All right. So we have a little bit of time. So I wanted to talk about the foreshadowing for the Sutekh reveal, since it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
quite necessarily neatly fit into our general format, especially with just the three of us. So obviously the most obvious one that's been talked about was the the bit in the Devil's Cord with going back to the future. And it you can kind of see from there that they're going more for a sort of like cognitive foreshadowing than a meaningful plot-based foreshadowing. So what I mean is something that'll make people think of what you're comparing it to, but actually doesn't like naturally lead you into it in the story. Sort of like how maybe if you're telling a story with Daredevil, you might include a shit ton of black and red to kind of go for the tone of Daredevil, even though that's not really like an in-universe thing. So that's kind of what they did there. But some things that are more in universe is somebody on Twitter, so I didn't check this myself, so I'm putting faith that they were correct. Noticed that the sound of the TARDIS like groaning or creaking or whatever in the episodes in which it does is the same sound that is made when Sutekh like psychically projects himself into the TARDIS in Pyramids of Mars. And also, we've had two different stories where they tie religion into death and death not being a bad thing. So we have in Boom, of course, where Splice is like, not concerned about her father being dead because of her religion. So kind of a typical kind of Christian sort of take. And then you have Dot and Bubble, where Lindy is kind of like, "Oh, my mom died. She's so lucky." And the way she said it, like went to the sky, makes it sound like it's connected to a religion as well. So I think looking back, those might have been connected to the idea of a death god.
Yeah, like I do know that I also saw something, I forget if I actually watched the clip or not, but someone edited together every time we heard that groaning noise since RTD took over, and apparently it technically started in Wild Blue Yonder. It was just a lot quieter and got louder. It makes it in Rogue.
And
it makes
that's
it
where
so
and that's where that particular cue didn't really tip most people off, because in Wild Blue Yonder, the TARDIS console gets coffee poured on it and is completely fucked up for most of the episode.
Yeah.
And then in Rogue, he's like, "Oh well, it's because the TARDIS is psychic." The thing was like, "Oh, you're a bounty hunter, this and that." So the Doctor was just making a flippant comment, but it kind of distracts the audience from trying to figure out what it is. Either of you notice anything that I didn't mention or that you want to bring up regarding the foreshadowing?
I did notice something. There is a there is kind of a line, a throwaway line that the Doctor makes referring to the memory TARDIS. They're like, "Oh, is this safe?" And he's like, "No, it's a total death trap." In which case
that's not really foreshadowing, Sutekh. That's
well, it's not foreshadowing Sutekh. It's foreshadowing the trapping of Sutekh. And then he doesn't do it with the memory.
Interesting.
He doesn't do it with the memory
he does
TARDIS.
that
He
with
does
his
it with
regular
the actual,
TARDIS.
yeah. But still, to him, the memory TARDIS is the TARDIS, kind of. Or they have to make it that way, otherwise it falls apart.
Yeah. I mean, like, the only other bit of thing that you could tie into that I can think of, we've technically talked about last week, where that one unit guy is named Ibrahim, and one of the...
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yep. Thanks for pointing that out.
And
I forgot. I talked about it in the past. I don't remember if it was on the stream or not.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it came up at one point.
Yeah.
Because we were like...
Yeah, so for those who aren't aware, Ibrahim was the first name of the guy that first summoned Sutekh's servant in Pyramids of Mars, and is the surname of a major unit officer. introduced in the RTD2 era,
Hmm.
either in Star Beast or the Giggle, probably in the Giggle.
Hmm.
Okay, and any other comments on that before we go on to our regularly scheduled programming?
Not that I can
Hmm.
think of, no.
Yeah.
All right, so we move on to the pecking order. What we liked about the episode, starting with Alex.
You know, it's funny because some things I'm like, is that more of an aspect overall, or is that a would that count more as a scene technically? Um, but I guess I'll just go with the acting. Across the board, because while there are, and we'll get to it, but there are some things that I'm like, not a big fan of, or could have done without, or this, that, whatever. It's definitely another one of those things where even if there's issues I have with the writing, the acting is good, like is fairly solid, and in some cases did kind of pull me out of my cynicism to be like, okay, you got me with that bit, and it's definitely the acting carrying it.
So I'm going to. I don't know why I should probably just stop reading what Twitter has to say because it's often nasty and never and rarely nice. But
Mhm.
just for the sake of Devil's Advocate and the sake of having something to discuss, some people would argue that Morris being dead for most of this episode would be a plus in the acting department. Is that part of
Oh.
your thought process, or and
No.
any reaction to that idea
Aw.
I mean,
people's disparaging more? I forget his full name.
mm,
I can't remember.
yeah,
I
like
I
feel like
liked
his
him.
last name is Gibbons, but
Yeah.
it's. Oh no, Oh no, I think Gibbons is his character's last name. Lenny Rush is the actor. Is the the child actor's name.
ah,
Hmm.
I mean, I thought his acting was fairly solid in the last story for like,
Mhm.
especially for a child actor. Like, I'm not necessarily expecting a lot, so um,
I mean,
you
Okay,
know,
so
I.
now that you've said that, I'll agree with you. I think people hated him because they didn't like his voice, which is
mm,
kind of a childish reason to disparage someone's acting. But I
Mhm.
yeah,
thought he played the role of, a precocious,
mm,
genius child,
Mhm.
pretty well. I think it
yeah.
was believable.
Especially because
Yeah.
like he was, they weren't doing the like adult in a kid's body kind of thing. He
Mhm.
was just like he was a child
Mm.
genius, and he is
I,
like
I don't think it was
getting
quite
very
as I don't think it was quite as excitable as a typical 13-year-old would be. So I think it was a little on the precocious side, but I think that fit the story better than
mm,
having him act like a 13-year-old.
yeah,
Mm.
rather than having him act like a 40-year-old or something,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
what these kinds of things sometimes tend to do, not always, but
Right.
Yeah, I actually like his character quite a bit. I think he's just he's one of those quirky type characters, kind of like the Lynx,
Mhm.
that kind of helps balance out the more human characters like Mel.
Thinking about it, it would have been interesting if they wrote him a little more like Dexter, the cartoon character, not the serial killer.
Mhm.
In that, like, he was like super smart, but he made like these really dumb leaps of logic because he only had a child's understanding of the world despite being a genius.
mm,
Mhm.
But at the same time, I think that would have really been a distraction from the like multiple ongoing plots occurring
mm,
in this special,
yeah. I
not
mean,
special, but
yeah.
two-parter finale.
It wouldn't surprise me if some people were just pissed that Shirley wasn't there. and were taking it out on
Right.
him. And it's
Mm.
like, well, that's not exactly a great idea. You can say
That
like,
wasn't,
I
yeah,
wish
that
we
wasn't
had
an
her,
acting
but
decision made by Lenny Rush.
yeah.
Hmm.
Any other comments about the acting before we move to the next one?
Not that I can think of, no. So, Aaron's
Okay.
turn.
Aaron, what did you like?
I liked what they did with Mel. I thought that was a pretty unique kind of turn to like have the companion actually taken over by the bad guy and thoroughly controlled. It kind of reminded me of the Hand of Fear, and I'm not sure what else may
I
have
mean,
had
really, a
like
lot of
most.
Sarah Jane stories.
It reminded me of the Black Guardian trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And for there was a moment where I was like, I wonder if the first draft of this was going to be for the Black Guardian, but they
Mm-hmm.
decided that Gabriel Wolf was alive and Valentine Dial was not, so they were going to make it Sutekh instead. And I mean, if so, we've clearly established that they did, structure the season around it being Sutekh. But that sequence really made me think, oh, maybe I wonder if this at some point in the drafting stage was going to be the Black Guardian.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it, and I'm thinking, or wait, was it in our chat, or was this another thing that I read on social media? Did one of you say that it should that Oh yes, there we go. Alex said this. So Alex, you thought maybe it would have worked better with Tegan than Mel.
I will get to that
Want
later.
to elaborate on that? You're gonna elaborate on that later?
Yeah.
Okay. So okay, so we'll leave that as a teaser for later. Okay, so it's up to me now then. And I will say I think I like the execution of the thing with the memory TARDIS. I think it was telegraphed way in advance, which, I mean, some people would say that's a bad thing. Some people would say that's a good thing. But ultimately, I think, for one thing, the fact that it tied into Tales of the TARDIS, I like that, they made it fit rather than I don't like having these ambiguously canon things that clearly have the canon characters in impossible situations. So I like that they actually said, okay, yes, if Tales of the TARDIS is featuring the real doctors and the real companions, here is the real TARDIS that appears in those shorts. But also, and even the fact that they had to go on that they had to make a quest to solidify it and stop it from being like from flickering in and out of existence as a memory, says that it was more than just hand waving, that there was serious thought put into it. But the way that it is executed fit into with the foreshadowing, and it kind of gave them something to do with the fact that the TARDIS was inaccessible, but they clearly couldn't just stand there and have a fist fight with Sutekh. All right, Alex, what did you dislike about this story?
Now we get to the bit where I'm like, the whole thing with Mel. Like, again, nothing against Bonnie Langford. She's acting her ass off. But this was written way too much like RTD felt like, oh yeah, I'll somehow be able to get Elizabeth Sladen even though she's been dead for over a decade. But also, hello, she falls asleep and then gets taken over by an evil entity. Tegan! Like,
see, that's what my first thought is. That's happened enough to Tegan.
Like,
oh yeah. I keep forgetting about Tegan being in the Mara.
Yeah, like, yeah, it's a different entity, but you could
That
say
would have been foreshadowed by them mentioning the Mara. Now that I think about it,
yeah, because it's like with Tegan, you at least have someone where it's like there's some sort of thing there to where Tegan's dealt with that before. So if you had to have like a companion fill the Sarah Jane role, maybe go with the other person who's got the most notable possession plot. Like, that is also a woman anyway, I guess, if you don't count. Well, I guess Turlo was more mind control than possession, but yeah, like.
And Tegan was more fragile too. Like Mel's a bit more strong-willed.
I mean, I think she was fragile because she was repeatedly traumatized and barely given the opportunity to heal from it.
So yeah, like it would have.
On the other hand, if to take into account something that Aaron mentioned earlier in the season, what if they brought Perry back instead?
Oh, geez.
They're like, well, we've killed Perry once and brought her back. Why don't we do it again?
Although I guess, yeah, we don't know what actually, at least as far as canonically anyway, ever happened to Perry. So,
so I think the Time Lords flat out say, in Trial of a Time Lord at the end that what
she
actually
marries the
happened
one
was that
dude.
she married King Yrcanos, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right because I haven't watched it in a while.
Yeah.
Which is a much better fate for her than what we saw happen.
Which is
But the way Big Finish took it was basically that like her timeline split into three. One version of her died, one version of her became the warrior queen, and a third version of her went back to Earth because of the Time Lords fucking around with timelines.
Yeah, of course it is funny because apparently Nicola Bryant preferred the version where where Perry dies, but I guess that's just because it would have been more.
I mean, she
memorable.
still gets work over the fact that there was a
version
of her character that survived.
But like,
so
yeah, I doubt she's like too like pressed about it. But apparently, she found that more interesting. But yeah, it's like it's kind of funny because like as much as I harp on the fact that it's like this would have fit Tegan better, it has been nice to allow Bonnie Langford to come back in like over the course of the last year and, you know, expand on Mel a bit rather than just being the 80s Victoria who's just there to scream. Right. Like it's been nice, but it's also like, oh, you could have brought back Tegan.
And on that note, think about like, because I saw some people are like, oh, now RTD has to bring back Joe Grant, and I'm like, I mean, if you're counting all of Modern Who as one return, she has come back.
Yeah, just only.
I mean, looking at it from that way, so we've had Sarah Jane return, we've had Joe Grant, K9, we've had Tegan, Ace, Mel.
And a bunch of like one-off cameo. Well, was there more than one-off cameo at the end of Power of the Doctor other than Ian? I forget if there was anyone else in that episode who was just there for that one scene.
I think Ian was the only one who had not appeared anywhere else. So you're right. We did have him back, and of course that's kind of good because we're never going to be able to get him back again now. So who's left that has not come back? So Susan, of course, being the blindingly obvious one that was talked about throughout this story. And I'm just thinking of ones where the actor is still around.
Romana. I would say either version, but we've only got one Romana.
The one
still
that's
with
alive.
Us still. Yeah.
Leela.
Which funnily enough is a companion where it probably would have made more sense if she had been killed off.
And I mean, considering Leela was on Gallifrey. If they
Hmm.
bring, I mean, they're not bringing her back unless they bring back Romana, and even then, Romana's more likely to come back.
Yeah.
Um,
Nissa, we haven't got back yet.
Yep, yeah, unless you count
Zoe, Jamie.
the kind of non-canon the funeral for Sarah Jane
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Fraser Hines and
let's
Wendy
see,
Padbury, I'm
is
pretty sure are both.
Wendy Padbury is still around.
Hmm.
I
I mean,
don't know if she's still acting.
yeah. I mean, they would obviously have to go to the, nondescript future that she's from
Right.
for her to
Which
come back,
definitely
but
would have
still.
changed by now. That would be an
Hmm.
interesting thing if they're just like, well, she's from the 21st century, but a different version of the 21st century.
Hmm.
And on that note, of course, obviously Fraser Hines is still around.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that it's not that they don't forget. It's not that they forgot the Doctor entirely. It's just anything beyond their first encounter with the Doctor they forgot.
That's correct. Yeah.
So they would be able to recognize that it's like, oh, you're the Doctor. Oh, wow. Now you look like this. Rather than, but all of that long history they had with the second Doctor is gone, aside from the first two stories.
Mm-hmm. Now they say that Stephen from the first Doctor era is still alive.
When you say Joe came back, you're talking about like the Three Doctors special then?
Sarah Jane Adventures.
Sarah
Sarah
Jane
Jane
Adventures.
Adventures?
Yeah, the
Oh, okay.
Death of the Doctor
Oh, okay.
story. Also, I guess she was also her only appearance in New Who proper was that she was in that Power of the Doctor scene at the end where she was in the group meeting kind of thing with the other companions.
And I keep thinking there was something else, but that was a big finish, so that really doesn't count. Ben and Polly aren't with us anymore. Neither is Victoria. So then we've we could bring back Sergeant Benton or Mike Yates.
That's something.
They're not taking. What?
God, I'm gonna have to try and remember a name. But a character that we haven't seen. I don't know if the actress is still around. I'd hope she is. Oh yeah, she's still around. Don't know if she's still acting, but Brigadier Bambera from Battlefield. Like, there's been no mention of her in unit-related stuff.
So yeah, there's definitely still some companions to be brought back. I imagine most of the first Doctor companions and even the second Doctor companions as well are probably less likely to come back, especially for a full story. But if there's anything that can be done, especially with Leela, with Romana, those are the glaring ones that are, well, how old is Lala Ward now? Now that I say that, because Tom Baker was older than her anyway.
She's 72.
And Louise Jameson is also in her 70s. So okay, so they may not be super up for it, but they may there's still a chance.
I mean, Romana doesn't have to do actiony stuff, so
true. And Romana and Susan have the benefit that they can just show up and regenerate.
Yeah. Which I will say, if they are going to use Susan and Romana again, I would rather them get them back while we still have those actresses, so they can regenerate if they want to be like, okay, now we can do that, so we can use other people moving forward just in case.
Okay, so I think I pushed that tangent on long enough. That was Alex's dislike about the episode. So, Aaron, what did you dislike?
I disliked a few things. I think the thing that kind of really um bothered me is it felt kind of like a lot of the doctor's emotional swings were kind of, or emotional scenes were kind of just rehashed from previous episodes. It felt kind of like it limited him. um I don't know, like just him kind of screaming out at the void. And I get that he's angry and everything,
Mhm.
but it felt like, man, I've seen this before, instead of, oh man, he's really pissed. My
Yeah, it
first
just
thing
kind
was
of
like,
feels like he's used up his bag of acting tricks already.
yeah, like he's kind of shown himself to be kind of a limited actor, which sucks because I like Shooty Gatwa, and that I actually really enjoy him. But it really seems like when he has to be dramatic, um, he usually either cries or screams at a void. Otherwise, his
I mean,
strongest acting.
that in that way that almost sounds more like the way the scenes are written than
Mhm.
Mhm.
because if the scene is written, the doctor screams in the void.
Yeah.
He's gonna scream in the void regardless of how good of an actor he is.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's just, it may not it probably has nothing to do with his acting. It's probably just the writing in that, because it's just like the
Hmm.
doctor turns and there's tears flowing down his face. I mean, that happens like 3 times during the episode, and it kind of
So it kind
diminishes
of
the
takes the
impact.
impact out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
it takes the
you
impact
literally
out of it.
say it at the same time.
Mm.
Mhm.
Especially since he's
So,
been
I think
crying like at least once an episode.
uh-huh. He's going to be known
Yeah,
as the
I mean, I've
crybaby
seen
doctor.
people complain about that for various reasons. I think this is a very different complaint about it than
Yeah,
the
Yeah,
ones that
it
I've
just
seen.
I think he's a good actor, and I just don't want to see him limited by bad writing like that.
Mm,
Or not even necessarily bad writing, just repetitive writing.
Yeah.
right.
Like you can show emotional vulnerability without having to cry in literally every episode.
Mhm. Which, and I think, yeah, I think that's one of the things, and it's not like a major complaint for the episode, but it was something that the devil was in the details on this. So I guess that's it for me.
Yeah. Interesting that, I mean, granted, only two people have gone and we don't have a fourth, but we haven't touched on any of the major things that people seem to really hate about this episode, because I have yet to see someone actually say they like this episode. But again, the negativity wins out on social media, so I'm not assuming everyone
Mhm.
Yeah.
hates it.
I think.
But I'm gonna kind of say not necessarily the decision that was made regarding who Ruby's mother is, although I
Mhm.
think I might have liked it if other decisions were made. But it's
Mhm.
almost sort of do you remember how in Game of Thrones, ignoring some of the big missteps, but the way that they did the first part of the final season was defeating the army of White Walkers, and then the latter part of the season was about, okay, now we're going to go back and deal with the humans. And a lot of people felt, well, this is an anticlimactic way to end the show. We've gotten rid of the big threat, and now we're dealing with the small one. And I
Mhm.
honestly think that it was because they were looking at the flash rather than the substance, because the emotional impact of everything was more tied into the humans than to the White Walkers.
Yeah.
But all of that said, I do think that this episode suffers in that kind of way, because
Mhm.
about 2/3 of the way through the episode, they've defeated Sutekh,
Mm.
and now the last third of the episode is all about Ruby and her mother, and the fact that we establish there's nothing particularly special about
Mhm.
Ruby's mother. So the
Mm.
last third of the episode, I feel it just takes all the wind out of its sails. It's yes, there's human stakes there, but I don't think it capitalizes on them.
Yeah.
And I kind of, it's part of me in my rewatch almost wanted to get, get to the part where they finish Sutekh and be like, okay, I'm done. I'm ready to jump on my laptop. Because I kind of feel like it's too much time after the climax, after,
Yeah.
the falling action has happened, and then there's this big chunk of episode left to resolving what's left.
Yeah.
With kind of no conflict. I mean, the conflict is, will Ruby talk to her biological mother?
Mm.
And that's resolved relatively soon. The answer is yes, she does. And then there's no more conflict really for the rest of the episode.
Mm.
And it's just, I feel like it goes on a bit long for what it is.
Mm.
And that's where I'm going to say, I mentioned this in chat during my rewatch, but I'm like, I almost would have liked the ending more if she had just turned out to be a total racist bitch who was just like, I can't believe my daughter was, adopted by a black family or something, because it would have been awful, and it might have been triggering for people, and I understand that, and I understand where the issues could have been there. But there would have been drama, there would have been something interesting, there could have been a moral to it. And instead, the moral of the story is, actually, this lady is just kind of boring and nice, and is going to be part of Ruby's life now. Which I understand. And I mean, and we can, I don't know if this is the right spot to talk about it. I'm not complaining about her being a normal person with regard to the Sutekh plot. I get why RTD did that, and the way the heart of the show fits with that. But the fact that it's just for that last chunk of episode, I don't think it fit as well.
Yeah, like apparently I mean, it's funny, apparently the reason he did that was because he wasn't a fan of the Ray Palpatine twist in Rise of Skywalker. But yeah, like I've seen people make Return of the King comparisons with how like the last 20 minutes of that is epilogue or something.
Right.
I've
Yeah.
and like normies couldn't put up with it. Like I have attention span problems, but I can sit through that, but that's me. But yeah, it does feel so weird to build up like, oh my god, look, it's Sutekh, this villain that previously took like a 4-episode serial to get through. And we're beating him in, 2/3 of one of the longer episodes. Like, admittedly, one of the longer episodes of the season. I think this one actually went about.
Yeah, I said it was 55 minutes. Is what Russell said.
Mm.
So it's probably like there's a regular episode dedicated to Sutekh.
Yeah.
And then an extended epilogue that I don't think that extended epilogue really earns its time.
Yeah. It's almost one of those things where like I almost kind of wish, and something that they could have done if Ruby is going to be in the Christmas special, which I feel like this was a way to have her not be. They could have had Ruby be like, you know what, as much as I want this, I am not emotionally ready for this right now. But now that I know who she is, I know who to look for. And that they go back, they have a moment with Carla and Cherry. And then, like, either in season 2 or the Christmas special or something, then they involve the mom. So,
I like that. Because and then Doctor Who is not above the idea of like Ruby tries to meet her biological mother, but they get swept up in a Cybermen invasion. They meet while she's saving her life. I mean, that's
Mhm.
basically what happened with Ryan and his dad
Yeah.
with the Dalek.
Hmm.
Hmm.
By the way, it's funny you mentioned the Ray thing because it's the some of the biggest complaints I've seen about those properties. And again, I'm aware that vocal minorities of negative opinions really went out on social media.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But some of the main things I see is, oh, that ending ruined the sequel trilogy because it focuses on the only special people that are born with powers are any
Yeah.
good.
Mhm.
And also the biggest complaint I see most often about this episode on social media so far in the 2 days since it's day and a half since it's aired has been, how dare she just be a normal woman? That ruins the whole season or
See,
the whole episode. Or
See, I don't. I have
Mhm.
also an opinion on the whole. Like it does. It does feel like the Last Jedi to me, with the whole subversion of expectations, and we're going to make it so that this important person is actually just a normal person. But
Mm.
unlike Rey, who has like a bunch of special abilities and stuff, Ruby is at least an everyman type character,
Except for the snow thing, which I
except
right.
for the
almost
snow.
think we can kind of blame on Sutekh at this point.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
But what I think, and since we're talking about it, where I think it really fits is like, I mean, Doctor Who for 60 years, and especially for the past 20 years, has always been normal people are important. Like
hmm.
every version of the Doctor since 2005 has said that many times.
Hmm.
Classic Doctors, I'm sure, said that several times as well, just not as often.
Hmm. And
So
usually sarcastically.
the idea that this normal woman with nothing special about her ends up being the key to saving the universe, it completely fits with the heart of the show.
Hmm.
It just does not make an interesting epilogue at all.
Yeah, it's like the difference for me between like this and Ray is Ray had a mystery box set up that we know was never going to go anywhere good. So
Mhm.
Ryan Johnson being like, let's not do that. Thanks. Let's not get into your bloodline dictates your importance. Let's
Mhm.
not do that. And then JJ came back around and went, yes, we will actually do that. Whereas this was like season worth of setup, and then it literally makes no, to me, it makes less sense that she's normal. I'm like relieved that Ruby's
Mhm.
just normal and her mum's just normal, because like I'm sick to death of RTD doing this with his companions. Like, we've had Bad Wolf, we've had Dr. Donna. I'm done. I don't need any more of that from Russell. So thank God. But also now it creates a ton of plot holes of like, well, how did any of this make sense when, thing.
I saw this summarized as Sutekh was defeated by becoming a Doctor Who fan.
uh
Okay, so we were about 15 plus minutes ahead of schedule. We've managed now to be exactly on schedule. So let's move on to our favorite scenes, starting with Alex.
um ooh, let's see. I think I'm gonna go with, like, as much as I would have preferred, as we talked about before, like, not um having Ruby meet her mom. That was a very heartwarming scene.
Mhm.
Um, because
The
like
scene in the
in the,
cafe.
yeah, like I was, I'll put it this way, it had me engaged by virtue of the fact that like this could go several ways. This could have the mum run away, of like, oh god, I'm not ready for this, and run off. You know, this could have had any number of ways it could have gone. Or yeah, like her turning out to be like not a good person, even though they kind of set up ahead of time with informed attributes that she is apparently a good person. But you know, so the fact that there is like they reunite and it's very nice is like, okay.
That your RTD was never going to have her be a nurse and a bitch, even though it's absolutely possible in real life to be both of those things.
Yeah, COVID's definitely proven that. Yeah, that's it for me.
Well, apparently that's one of the main majors that, like, you know, you're a mean girl in high school and then you become a nursing major in college.
Mm-hmm.
So
My mom was a nurse and she met plenty of them.
All right. Anything else about that scene?
No, that's it.
All right, Aaron, what's your favorite scene?
I'm going to say Kate Stewart standing up to Sutekh saying there will be birds. Because that just shows me the strength of her character, and just like I thought that was a pretty cool, pretty awesome. Even though she's about ready to die, you know, she's still defiant.
Strength of her faith in the doctor as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting given that it almost seemed like they were building up to something with her being pissed at the doctor last episode.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't really have the opportunity to go anywhere here. So I kind of wonder what they were doing with that plan. All right, that's it for that. All right. So my favorite scene. Let's see. I think I'm going to go with the scene where they find the memory TARDIS, and I already talked a bit about the memory TARDIS, but part of that is just the whole, like, the Sutekh side of it, right? You have Harriet controlling the TARDIS, which looks all menacing and evil, and it's this this fucked up evil TARDIS. You have the Doctor, like, oh, you could have killed me by now. Why haven't you? And really getting under Sutekh's skin in a, it's a real Doctor speech moment. And I thought that, so you have different elements there. You have the creepy TARDIS, you have the Doctor speech, you have the memory TARDIS, all converging into this one moment that, all of those things are executed very well. Everyone's gone quiet. We don't have a problem with the call, right? Okay.
Nope.
All right. I'm scared for a second. All right. Least favorite scenes, Alex.
Okay. I'll go with the
that went so fast. We're ahead of schedule again.
I'm going to go with the entire section of the world being turned, like everyone on Earth being turned to dust, because I immediately checked out. Because I was immediately like, well, this isn't gonna stand. Like, when it was just like the people in the room with Susan Triad, I was like, okay, that's like a little death. That could stick. And then
RTD
it's just
can
this...
have little of death as a treat.
But then, like, it keeps going, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm just emotionally checked out because I know this is gonna get undone. Like, oh god,
I watched the sneak peek for the episode, which was mainly like the part of them on the motorcycle or scooter or whatever you want to call it, and I was like, oh, so this episode is clearly going to end with them. My brain went, of course, to collecting the Dragon Balls, which is not a Doctor Who thing. But then again, reset buttons are not a new thing to Doctor Who.
Right. I mean, the thing that came to mind at first was Last of the Time Lords, but that at least had like the rest of the world, like the difference between this and that, and while I'll cut it like the tiniest bit of slack ultimately is later down the line. It's kind of reference that people remember dying, so it's at least not like time was rewound like in Last of the Time Lords, where it's like we've rewound time to the point before everything went to shit. So
So
this
I do have an issue related to that, but I'm going to talk about it later.
yeah. But yeah, it just immediately made me check out, and that was like really early in the episode, so I was like, ugh. Like they kind of won me over like a bit with some stuff afterwards, but I was just spent the rest of the episode waiting for the reset button. So it was really annoying.
Mm-hmm. All right, Aaron, least favorite scene.
I'm kind of curious as to how is Mel shivering if she's already dead. Because by the time the snow starts falling in earnest, she's out in the hallway. She's like, she's supposed to be evil at this point. The doctor knows that she's cold. She's already dead.
Right.
But she's sitting there shivering. Unless it's like hitting. Well, if she's dead, then it wouldn't be hitting her on a spiritual or emotional level because there is no Mel.
Yeah,
it's
it's like
Sutekh.
it's almost like two different drafts of the scene clashing with each other. You have so the doctor touch, she and the doctor touch each other's hands. I think the doctor grabs her hand. So in theory, at that moment, the doctor is like, "Oh, she's dead. Her heart's not beating. Her hand feels like there's no blood flow. She's dead. She's a servant of Sutekh." And then she goes out into the hallway, and Sutekh takes her over as if he hadn't already done so.
Yeah.
So yeah, that it doesn't fit with the reveal that comes a few minutes later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it for me.
All right. So my issue is the big beating Sutekh scene. Specifically because the one way I see this possibly working is, okay, we're taking Sutekh back through the timeline. We're going to cause his wave of death to kill him, because if his wave of death kills him, then it can't kill other people. That would kind of make sense. But we know that is not what happened, because everybody remembers dying. And if they remember dying, then that means they did die in the first place.
Yeah.
So what you ultimately have here is the only thing that happened is the doctor reversed the polarity of the Sutekh flow. And that does not make sense. Sutekh does not have life-granting powers. Dragging him back through time is just going to make more death and not life.
Yeah.
Even though the doctor says he represents life, that does not give him magic life-granting powers.
Yeah.
That almost would have made more sense if they were like, actually, Ruby's parents were the god of life. Ruby's dad is the White Guardian or something.
Yeah.
Which,
So
would have been a little hackneyed, but it would have made more sense.
It would have been.
So ultimately, you have this conclusion that just makes no sense, because dragging a death wave through a death wave, this isn't algebra. You're not, two negatives don't make a positive. You're just making a bigger death wave. If you're on fire and then I hit you with a flamethrower, you're not going to be like, "Oh, thank you, I'm not burned anymore." You're just going to burn harder.
Yeah, like it's funny because now that's making me realize, oh, I wonder if Russell had a moment where he was writing this and went, crap, I can't do bad wolf again. So I can't just do that hand wave. So crap, I need to come up with another. Although it is so funny because now this is making me realize we literally read an article earlier where he's like, oh, I'm gonna make things simpler. And this ending is the most confusing, convoluted ending he's probably ever come up with.
Also, does this mean we're looping back into Torchwood Miracle Day if we've killed Death?
That would be. It's not going to go there, but it would be interesting if that was the consequence.
So yeah, we'll see how far-reaching the reset button is as well, because I've been speculating with other people that maybe this will undo the flux or the Master's genocide of Gallifrey and etc.
I know. I mean, what is with
for
Killer
some reason
Dust?
when you mentioned the Master to me in text, for some reason I thought you were saying it was going to undo Legopolis, or maybe you did say that, and I'm not remembering, but that was what I thought you were saying. It was going to undo the flux and undo Legopolis.
Also, what is with Killer Dust destroying universes? There's like, you can't have Killer Lightning or like Killer Water or something other than that.
Fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, not saying that the episode had to be written this way, and this is the only way it would have worked. But what I thought they were going to do, and maybe this would have been bad as well. I thought they were going to use the memory TARDIS to basically like cross the Doctor's own timeline and prevent Sutekh from becoming corporeal, and and prevent Susan Twist from becoming the Angel of Death, and thereby prevent the ending of the previous episode from happening. Which, I mean, that's how Nick Briggs would have written it. Sorry for don't mean to you're catching stray shots here in an episode you didn't write, but that's what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, like, why don't they just go back to the beginning of time and wipe everything out instead of like having all these different Susan triads planted throughout time and space? You only need one Susan triad to wipe out the universe
because
before it even
if there's
begins.
only one, a clever Time Lord can do something about it and trap her or stop her. But if there's dozens, that's another story. Although that said, we talked about the montage scene that was cut. That's where a montage of Susan Twists would have been really good. And maybe they had planned to do like 2 like rhyming montages, and each of those sets would have been used twice. Like if we had seen, like, they talk about the Ood all the time. What if there was a Susan Twist on the Ood sphere that we saw, like, doing her thing?
Yeah.
And if or this would have been cheaper if we cut back to, well, I guess Dot and Bubble Susan Twist was killed by slugs. That's a bad example. But if we cut to what other planet? Space, the one on Pacifico del Rio, which Ruby thinks is English. If we saw her becoming the Angel of Death, then
we technically did. She was one of the ones in that little montage of.
No, but we didn't see her. We didn't see her unleashing the dust of death.
We saw her about to. But yeah.
Did we?
Yeah, there is a little montage of showing varying all
Susans,
human appearing ones.
Okay. I need to go back and see that then, because I missed that.
Yeah, it's very like she's clearly just standing in front of a green screen each time, but yeah.
Right, and I completely missed that. I need to go back and rewatch that scene then. Okay, so thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, even then, I think it's only 1 or 2.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, and that brings us to final thoughts. Alex.
Yeah, this brought up more questions than it answered.
Mhm.
Like the snow thing. That's one thing we didn't get to that like
Mhm.
still is a sticking point for me. The pointing. That
Mhm.
I don't accept the explanation for that. That is
Yeah.
just RTD being a troll. Like,
Mhm.
oh whoops, I needed that for misdirection, but actually she was pointing at the Ruby Road
She
sign. Like, no.
Yeah.
she dropped off the baby. No one knows who she is. No one met her or spoke with her.
Yeah.
But because she pointed at a sign and somehow that conferred the
Yeah.
name to the baby.
Like that is one consistent issue. Even if people who like are more positive on it than we've been, I've seen people being like, okay, yeah, no, that's the one sticking point that I'm not getting past is like, who's she pointing for? Some rando at the church that maybe saw her through a window, the CCTV? Like, how would the
Mhm.
CCTV necessarily know that she was pointing at
Right,
at
yes.
the
So
sign?
maybe
Mhm.
she was named. Actually, no, because the tape degraded over time.
Mm.
I guess the implication is that like the security guard watched the footage and was like, "Oh, this baby is named Ruby Road."
um, but yeah, it's there's so many. I did see people also saying that this felt like RTD trying to write a Moffat finale, which I mean, there's enough timey-wimey shit going on that yeah, this feels like something that Moffat would do. I mean, I even joked somewhere that by virtue of the everyone dies, oh nope, they're all back to life now. It feels very the Doctor dances on a universal scale.
Mhm.
Of like undoing the death. Um, but yeah, it's like this is probably one of the few at least from memory. I would have to go back and watch them all. But like the usual standard for this era of Doctor Who is part one of a two-part finale is good or great, and then part two drops the ball. This felt like part one had me very wary, and then part two confirmed my, wariness as being justified because it was like there's good stuff in there here and there, but ultimately I'm just left asking more questions than had answered. The snow I still don't think has had a
Mhm.
proper answer yet, especially because it was snowing when uh Mrs. Flood was on the roof, which that could mean it's tied to her. um I don't know, we'll see where the hell that goes,
But
but
yeah, we
yeah.
haven't even talked about her.
Yeah. Yeah, this is for something that he said he was trying to make it simpler, this is just overly complicated. But that's it for me.
All right, Aaron, final thoughts.
Mm, so yeah, I am kind of disappointed in how all of this turned out. Like, I'm not like table flipping mad about the whole like your parents are normal. It was just kind of a sigh of boredom because we've seen this so many times before. Like, just it's no longer like subverting expectations. It's just the expectation now. Like, oh, these people are gonna be normal, aren't they? For Ruby, concerning Ruby's parents, anyway.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think the writing at least made it so that Shooty couldn't really stretch himself as an actor, like it kind of, I felt like maybe it hamstrung him because it just felt like he had four faces: the screaming mad, the determined, and then the goofy and the crying. So that's what I saw mostly in this final episode. um and you don't even see his goofy fun loving self all that much too, which is kind of, that's my favorite part of his acting for the Doctor. So um I'm also kind of weirded out. How does the future exist if the past is wiped out? That type of deal.
Hmm.
Also, I was reading a Screen Rant article, and apparently, Unit is London's easiest place to get hired. Is a quote that they made.
Oh, because
um,
of Rose.
well,
Well, that and
Rose, and
Susan
then
Triad is like randomly recruited at the end. Yeah.
yeah. Have
And
you
she's
thought
a
about
tech
joining a unit?
billionaire, though. So
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
and they've already. I mean, they've been doing background checks on her every day for the past however many months.
Mm-hmm.
So
Little stuff like I do like the fact that they called back to previous episodes like Mad Jack, and that he wasn't just some throwaway villain. Because he was a great, just psychopathic human, a normal, not superpowered human that, you know, happened to come into political power and was a real threat.
please don't let me forget to mention him. I don't want to interrupt you and give thoughts, but don't let me forget.
Mm-hmm. And also, I enjoyed the fact that they actually did work in footage of Pyramids of Mars, of the original serial for that. So that was a nice, call out, and like they didn't just, hand wave it or just mention it a couple of times. They actually looked back at different clips of it. So
Mhm.
so that was kind of cool and exciting and fun. And further notes for me, Mrs. Flood kind of, or Miss Flood looks like she's making a reference to Romana, I've heard, with the white fur parka that she
Mm.
wears.
Mhm.
And then also some people think that she might be the White Guardian. So
Some people think she's Clara because of her other outfit, even though I think she's about a foot taller than Clara.
mhm. All right. And so, if she does wind up being Romana, does that mean, are we going to revisit the Key to Time as well as the Black and
Hmm.
White Guardians? So,
Hmm.
especially since we know that those are deities as well. So,
Hmm.
and that's it for me.
All right, so I mentioned in watching this, it almost feels like RTD was still in writing anniversary special mode when he wrote this, because
Mm.
we get both audio and visual references to Susan. We get video footage of 70s stories. We get mentions of all of these different planets. We get mentions of Time and Irani of all the fucking episodes. Um, it's like there's as many episodes as RTD could fit into an episode, despite, the anniversary special being a year ago. So
Mm.
it's like, like the goal was for this entire season to be the anniversary episode. Um, but yeah, as a serial, it's cohesive, but it's also disjointed. Like we have the Mrs. Flood thing. Maybe it'll make sense when we find out more, but like last episode, she was like, "Yeah, well, screw you and your tea." I'm seemingly like a herald of Sutekh, and then in this episode, she's like, "Oh no, we're well." First, she's like, "I'm going to conquer heaven." Oh no, we're going to die together. Oh, and now I'm being an enigmatic deity figure again. She's all over the place.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
that's right. I wanted. Well, before I mentioned, I mentioned earlier the thing with Kate Stewart. Like they seem to be building up for a conflict, and then boom, no conflict. 100% faith in the Doctor. She's just like the Doctor is going to solve everything.
Mm.
Um, which at least the Doctor did. Chidozi did come back to life, so there's that. I remembered his name. I
Mhm.
forgot while I was watching. Um, the other thing is this: if we had like five of us here and it had gotten to that point, my other least favorite scene, the Doctor is fucking giddy that somebody instituted some sort of eugenics program with
Mm.
mandatory DNA testing for all Britons. Like there's literally only one world leader in history that I could imagine actually instituting something like
Mm.
that. Even though, I know Godwin's law is a thing, but this is a fictional character.
Yeah.
Like that is some Hitler level shit.
Mm.
Mhm.
Like and the doctor is so happy about it. It reminds me. Well, no, that okay. I'm not going to bring on to the other things because that was a Chibnall complaint, so it has nothing to do with RTD. But it's just fucking weird that the doctor is like, oh yes, they forced everybody to undergo DNA testing for some nefarious purpose. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I get using the tools available to you, but at least like a more appropriate emotional response would have been
Right.
nice.
Especially, it's especially alarming to have a black doctor say that. To have that
Yeah.
attitude of like, oh yeah,
And I mean, and he's
eugenics.
literally only had one story where like being black was meaningful
Right. But yeah,
for
it
him.
is
So like
still
he's
just
new to be
weird to
he's new
have.
to being black, just like season what was it, series 10, Jodie Whittaker was new to being a woman. But yeah, even still the optics are not great.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like really good in terms of like great visuals, great acting in this episode. Some really weird writing decisions. I have no idea what I'm going to rate this episode, and I have a very short amount of time to make a decision.
Yeah.
Let's move on to ratings.
Ugh.
Remember, we're rating the two-parter,
Yeah.
not just Empire of Death.
You know what? As much positives as there are, this lands on such a thud that I'm going to be slightly mean. I'm not going like really low, but like normally I would be like, oh, the acting pulls this up to a 4. You know what? I'm gonna give this a 3.5, and that might dip, but for at least for now, 3.5.
Aaron, what's your rating?
I'm gonna go with the 3.5 as well.
I was thinking about it, and just hearing you say that, it kind of confirms for me too. I think I'm also going to say a 3.5. It's probably enough good things not to be a 3.0, but it's hard to justify a 4. So of course, 3.5, 3.5, and 3.5 averages out to a 3.5. So that gives us 3.88 for Space Babies, 3.88 for Devil's Cord, 4.63 for Boom, 3.25 for 73 Yards, 4.38 for Dot and Bubble, 4.50 for Rogue, and 3.50 for Legend of Ruby Sunday, Empire of Death. So out of 476 things reviewed, that makes this number 341 or tied for 318, depending on how you count it. It is on par with A Town Called Mercy, Mark of the Rani, Twice Upon a Time, The Christmas Invasion, City of Death, 42, Planet of the Ood, Savages, The Eaters of Light, Planet of the Dead, The Tsuranga Conundrum, Fugitive of the Judoon, Amy's Choice. It is not as good as Evil of the Daleks, The Doctor, the Widow, the Wardrobe, The Woman Who Lived, The Tomb of the Cybermen, Full Circle, or Resurrection of the Daleks. And it is better than The Long Game, The Android Invasion, The Five Doctors, The Mythmakers, The Androids of Tara, The Curse of Peladon, and Silver Nemesis. And I'm very curious if this is actually the previous season finale. I'm pretty sure none of them are going to be this low. But I wanted to just see if this is the lowest season finale RTD has ever written. Yeah, Bad Wolf Parting of the Waves was 4.17. Army of Ghost Doomsday was 4.13. Series 3 finale was Utopia Trilogy was 4.50. Why am I forgetting these episode names? Probably because of how poor my sleep quality's been. Stolen Earth Journey's End was 4.70. So yeah, so we were in RTD1 era, we rated the season finales higher and higher as each went on. Let's count The End of Time as a season finale. The End of Time is the only season finale from the, written by RTD that rated lower than this. So that is all we have to say about The Legend of Ruby Sunday, Empire of Death. Please let us know in the comments what you thought of this week's episode. Don't forget to like the video since you've listened this far. Subscribe on YouTube to get our exports whenever we stream, or follow us on Twitch to get notified when we do. And 2 weeks from now, we start reviewing a new spin-off series with Redacted SOS, written by Juno Dawson and starring Charlie Craggs as Cleo Proctor, Lois Chimimba as Abby McPhail, and Holly Quinn Unkra as Shauna Thompson. We'll see you then.